Hey everyone, and welcome to Tony for Kalima. Tony for you. Of all the pantheons known throughout history, few could match the fame, or rather infamy, of the Aztec gods. With the many rituals involving the death of the victim and horrific body mutilation, this culture has become synonymous with the practice of human sacrifice. With the idea baked into the very creation myth of the Aztec belief system, it was closely tied to everything they did, and the citizens were even happy to volunteer their heads onto the chopping block. Despite the ritualistic slaughter of thousands of their own citizens, drenching the steps of their pyramids with a sea of blood, this culture endured and thrived for hundreds of years. So, let's learn what we can about their gods, and try to understand just why they underwent such gruesome rituals. Without any further ado, let's talk about the terrifying Aztec gods. Content warning. In this video, I'll be describing some pretty stomach-turning rituals, up to and including dismemberment, cannibalism, and torture, so viewer discretion is advised. Because of this, I want to shout out the great people over at my Patreon. You all make these videos possible. If you'd like to support, check the link in the description below. Before we can begin to understand the Aztecs' practices, we must first learn about their creation myth. Also, please bear with me as I try to pronounce these names. In the beginning, there were two beings, Huehueteotl, the old god, and Itzpapaotl, the obsidian butterfly. This pair were husband and wife, and eventually, getting tired of being the only beings in the universe, they decided to have children together. 4 gods were produced initially. The first, named Xipe-Totec, god of seasons and agriculture. Huitzilopochtli, god of war and the sun, Tezcatlipoca, god of providence and the night, and Quetzalcoatl, god of life, light, and wisdom. After the initial batch of gods, Itzpapalotl and her husband Huehueteotl decide to rapid-fire out 400 more gods out into the universe, called the Mimixcoa. Now that there were so many of them, the final task was to, well, create the rest of existence, of course. The task fell to Quetzalcoatl and Huitzilopochtli, where Quetzalcoatl created the 13 layers of heaven where the gods reside. The pair together create the primordial waters, with the only denizen being a giant crocodile named Cipactli. From this creature, the earth was shaped. Finally, Quetzalcoatl creates the 9 layers of the underworld, called Mictlan. With the base of creation done, the final and most important step was left: the life-sustaining ball of energy in the sky, the sun. Unlike the other aspects of creation, the sun requires a god's entire essence to create, and the problem is both Xipe-Totec and Quetzalcoatl want to be the sun. Thus, war broke out in heaven and the brothers fought. Whenever one rose close to their goal of becoming the sun, the other would knock them down. Every time this happened, it would be considered a cycle. 4 full cycles passed, and the rest of the gods were getting pretty fed up. Also, presumably using their battle as a cycle wasn't a great way of measuring time, so they had to wrap things up and finally get that sun created. The rest of the gods proposed that the one to become the sun would be put to a vote. So democracy was built into the Aztec creation myth. That's pretty cool. After much deliberation, and to everyone's surprise, it was Huitzilopochtli to become the sun, placing him as the highest being in the universe, above the peak of the heavens themselves. When the sun was created though, he just sat there, not moving. Frustrated, Quetzalcoatl started throwing spears at his brother to get him to budge, but throwing spears into space was pretty useless. Later, it was revealed that getting the entire sun to move required a lot more energy than they first expected, and the gods did what they thought was best. Almost every god ritualistically sacrificed themselves to give energy to the sun, until only a few beings were left. Those beings were Itzpapalotl, Tezcatlipoca, Quetzalcoatl, and Xipe-Totec. The rest were fuel for the sun. Now, with over 400 gods sacrificed to it, the sun still did not move, and so Quetzalcoatl had to give it the final little push by blowing some air onto the ball of plasma to finally get it moving. Thus, the requirements for sustaining life were fulfilled on Earth, and the remaining gods got to business. Xipe-Totec and Quetzalcoatl descended to the Earth and created 2 tribes of humans. Their mother, Itzpapalotl, descended to the earth as well, but in the form of a 2-headed deer to spend her time. I guess she's been through enough. She can spend her time however she wants. Xipe-Totec finds out her true identity though, and imprisons her to harness her power, granting him near invincibility. It was then that Xipe-Totec's very own followers turned against him and desired the deer goddess's power for themselves. During the fighting, however, Itzpapalotl in her deer form breaks free, kills Xipe-Totec, eats his heart, and then dies. Immediately after, Huitzilopochtli descends from being the sun, I guess, and kills all of Xipe-Totec's followers, eating their hearts. Then eats Itzpapalotl's deer heart because why not, gaining all of their power. Directly after this story, Quetzalcoatl created the passage of time. Okay, these gods really are dropping like flies. Now you might be asking, what happened to the Quetzalcoatl tribe? Well, the entire time they were living in a paradise untouched by the chaos of the other gods. Pretty sweet. To the people's pleasure and the other gods' disappointment, Quetzalcoatl grew very fond of his followers and even let them stop sacrificing each other to the gods, instead asking for animal sacrifices as tribute. Tezcatlipoca hears about this and will not let it stand, deciding to sabotage Quetzalcoatl. The gods get together and Tezcatlipoca offers a drink to his brother Quetzalcoatl, who then gets absolutely blitzed. The party goes on, and eventually Quetzalcoatl parties with his sister too. Now during this time, though it's never explicitly said, Quetzalcoatl does something horrible. Something so horrible, in fact, that when he sobers up and realizes what he did, he burns himself alive and transforms into the planet Venus. Based on context clues with his sister, I'm sure you may be able to understand what it might be. With Quetzalcoatl's departure, it heralds the coming end of the fifth cycle, the cycle we're in right now, where disaster will hit the world and many will die. When Quetzalcoatl returns, however, he will usher in the sixth and final cycle, which will bring about everlasting peace and prosperity. Based on that very strange creation and apocryphal myth, we can come to understand why human sacrifice was so ubiquitous in the region. It was a part of their everyday lives, and a practice even the gods took part in. Each and every sacrifice would nourish the gods' very essence and enhance their power. It was believed that every cycle of exactly 52 years, the world had a possibility of ending completely, so sacrifice was viewed as a necessity to prolong the very earth itself. Each and every god in the pantheon held incredible power over transforming the fabric of reality and the passage of time. By gaining a god's favor through ritualistic sacrifice, you could request good fortune and prosperity to yourself and the tribe, and keep the world spinning to boot. What's a couple thousand people's lives worth in the face of a god's fortune, and the continuation of the very universe? Let's get a little more specific with each god to truly understand the terrifying nature of living in these lands. Some of these rituals can get pretty intricate and very dark, but I'll try to just convey the facts of the matter. It's also important to note that not all that were sacrificed viewed it as a punishment. In fact, the opposite is quite true. Many members of the culture volunteered or were ecstatic to be sacrificed for the prosperity of their people. That doesn't exactly mean that the practices were great, but it softens the blow a little bit, knowing that they were happy at least. During the time of the Aztecs, between 1300 and 1521, it was estimated that approximately 20,000 were sacrificed a year on the low end, so let's learn a little bit more about it. First is a ritual dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun. Well, actually, we know now that he is the sun. This ritual was to take place at the Aztecs' main temple, Templo Mayor. This ritual is likely the most famous and the first thing that comes to mind when the thought of Aztec rituals gets brought up. At 4 of the 18 Aztec festivals, a member of the community would be draped in the god's colors and completely covered in blue body paint. They would be brought up to the top of the temple and placed upon a massive stone. The priest tasked with carrying out the ritual would chant a prayer to the god of the sun, then plunge their dagger into the body of the victim, cutting a massive line through the sternum. Quickly, the heart would be pulled out and raised to the sun while it was still beating. The body would then be kicked down the temple steps, painting them with blood, and eventually be taken away to be buried or cremated. Next are 2 rituals dedicated to the god Tezcatlipoca, god of the night, magic, and fate. The first ritual is much more honorable, but strange. 2 people would enter a gladiatorial arena and be given fake weapons. Opposite these individuals would be elite members of Aztec military, dubbed Jaguar Knights and Eagle Warriors. They would die honorably in combat, but having to use fake weapons, and oh, I forgot to mention they also tied them to the ground, made it much more like an execution than an honest battle. Oh well. The next ritual to the god of destiny was much more dark. A young boy would be chosen as a sacrifice, and for a year they would live a very specific lifestyle. For the year, the boy would be dressed as the god and be treated as a living incarnation of the divine. He would be given a flute and tasked with traveling the streets of the dwelling, mimicking the god. The boy would be showered in praise and notably be popular with women, which is very weird considering it was a young boy, but whatever. When the day came for his execution, a feast would be held in his and the god's honor. Then he would be expected to climb the pyramid, break his flute, and give himself up to the priest. When the boy's life was taken, the next incarnation of the god would be chosen, and the cycle would start anew. Next is quite possibly the most disturbing ritual, dedicated to Xipe-Totec, god of seasons and rebirth. Xipe-Totec was also dubbed Our Lord the Flayed One, so I'm sure you can see where this is going. This god had a festival dedicated to him called Tlacaxipe-Hualitzli. A sacrifice was chosen for each of the 40 days preceding the festival, and much like the ritual of Tezcatlipoca, these individuals would live as an embodiment of the god during that time. These people got a raw deal though, since they only get to live in luxury for 40 days, and at the end of those 40 days, they would all be taken to the temple of Xipe-Totec. Once there, their skin would be flayed from their bodies in a gruesome display, and then it would be worn by the attendees as a full bodysuit. While wearing the skin, they would travel the city, collecting gifts and fighting battles. The skinless victims, still alive, would then have their hearts removed and their bodies dismembered for the rest of the attendees to eat of their flesh. All of these rituals are downright horrific by today's standards. It's hard to imagine a culture that would be not just accepting of these practices, but enthusiastic about the brutal killing and sometimes torture of their family and friends. Men, women, children, prisoners of war, it doesn't matter. All were sacrificed in a religious fervor thought to be left behind thousands of years ago. While the numbers of those sacrificed may or may not have been inflated by the invading forces of Latin America, the practice was undeniably taking place and was ubiquitous at the time, and as we learned, was baked into the very creation myth of their religion. Learning of these practices is morbidly fascinating, and the rich culture of these lands deserves to be remembered, both the good and the gruesome. That covers the Aztec creation myth and the terrifying rituals the gods demanded. Let me know what you thought of the story and which ritual was the most disturbing in the comments down below. And while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. The festival of flaying has to be the most horrifying. The ritual torture and cannibalism hits every box to make your skin crawl. Hard to believe it was done fairly frequently. Special thanks to Andre Vinicius da Silva Valens, Anton, Kalos, Goose Kebab, Jeter Michelle, Just a Middleman, Lil Reb, Matt M, Patty123, Stuart Ash, The Digital Dutchman, Video Gamer 75, and many more for supporting the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to support, check the link in the description below. Thanks for watching this macabre Aztec ritual roundup, and I'll see you in the next Tony for You. Have a good one.